Hello everybody and welcome to Mr. Stansfield's Education Videos. This is part 3, introducing the film camera. And right now we're going to talk a little bit about the light meter. The light meter is going to be viewable through the viewfinder. So when you hold that viewfinder up to your dominant eye, you will see something in there that indicates to you the exposure. Now, how do you tell which eye is your dominant? If you've never done this before, take two hands, both eyes open, take your hands, make a little triangle, and line it up with something off in the distance. In this case, I'm focusing on the lens of the video camera. Hold it out, both eyes open, hold it out, and slowly but surely make your way back to your face. And what you're going to do is allow your hands to come back to a single eye. And you can see I'm right eye dominant because what happened was my brain actually interpreted the visual data that was coming there and said, okay, this is my dominant eye. You may be a lefty with a right eye dominant, you may be a righty with a left eye dominant, so that's just something to pay attention to. You may have never noticed this before. You may have never had to notice this before. Shooting sports like archery, if you ever did archery at camp, you might have been a righty, but you were set up lefty because you might have been left eye dominant. And if you set up with the bow and arrow, if you're left eye dominant, but you're righty and you set it up for a righty, your visual information is all wacky, it's all off. So, can you look through the viewfinder with your non-dominant eye and make a picture? You can. It's going to feel pretty strange. So you can just try it. Pretty much all cameras are meant to be operated and fired with your right hand and focused and sort of supported with your left hand. Whether you're righty or lefty, that's generally how it's done. And then in terms of your right eye or left eye dominant, hold up the viewfinder to your left eye, hold up your viewfinder to your right eye, hold it up to both, and you'll see you'll see which one makes sense. One will make a lot more sense than the other. Then when you look through, there may be, depending on your camera, you may have to turn it on first. Some cameras you don't have to. Depending on your camera, you may need to press the button down part way. So the shutter release button here, you may have to press that down part way. Don't push it down all the way, don't accidentally take a picture, depending on your camera, to activate the light meter. Some light meters are a mechanical needle that'll kind of move up and down, and then when it's in the middle, you know that it's correctly exposed. That's the right balance of shutter speed and aperture. Some light meters have little colored kind of arrows that point, go left or right. What does that mean? It means rotate the dial on the top of the camera, the shutter speed, or rotate the aperture. And what you're looking for, maybe, some of them, will have like a little circle that lights up when it's correctly exposed, when you have the correct balance of light. What you're looking for is some indication to move the shutter speed or aperture dials to adjust the exposure, and then some indication that you're there. It could be putting a needle in the middle. It could be taking some LED kind of indicators. So on the N60 that I've got here, or a Rebel G, these older late model Canon film cameras, you'll see an LCD readout, and sometimes you'll see like 3 lines to the right of a plus or a minus, and it's not super intuitive. So you really have to look for, how do you actually figure it out? Well, you can figure it out by looking through the viewfinder, activating the light meter if it needs to be activated, and then rotate your aperture dial and see if anything changes. Rotate your shutter speed dial and see if anything changes. And start with that shutter speed somewhere in the middle, like 1/30th of a second or 1/60th of a second. If you're doing it inside, just kind of normal room, if you have your shutter speed on 1/1000th of a second and adjust all of the aperture rings on your camera, chances are nothing's going to change. And that doesn't mean that your battery's dead or that the light meter's dead. What it means is that 1/1000th of a second at every aperture setting isn't giving you the right exposure. So you need to kind of get an average shutter speed and then rotate your aperture setting from there. Now sometimes your aperture setting actually isn't mechanically adjustable. You may have to do it here on one of these cameras. There's a little click wheel. You may have to do it with your thumb, or there might be a click wheel here. You may have to press a button with your index finger and then do something with your thumb, or vice versa. You press a button with your thumb and then do something with your index finger. So on these sort of late model film cameras that came out in the 90s into the 2000s, they were trying to make more advanced features, which was great. except now it's actually just not that intuitive. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you really understand all aspects of camera and are good at troubleshooting stuff. I can help you if you want, if you're looking for some support and trying to figure out what's, how to do something on your camera. I can usually figure it out, but it's not always intuitive. Knowing those 4 things, okay, how to set the ISO, how to set the shutter speed, how to set the aperture, and how your light meter works, that's going to set you up for success. You're going to have the correct exposure on most of your pictures on your roll of film if you understand those 4 things. One last thing to talk about is focus. On a camera like this, the K1000, you're going to manually focus, and you just rotate a ring on the lens until it's in focus. You may have a split circle, so that's a circle with a line through it, and there are 2 images, and as they kind of line up, when they line up perfectly, you might see a line that kind of splits. As that line, you look for a line kind of in the middle of this, in the middle of the circle. Once that line becomes aligned, you know that image will be sharp. Some cameras have an autofocus. Some of these later model cameras have autofocus. You need to figure out how to activate the autofocus, and you have to figure out how to, making sure that your lens is actually working, that the focus is actually working. If you're picking up a camera that hasn't been used in 15 years, maybe the autofocus doesn't work. Maybe the motor has died inside of the lens. There's a little teeny electric motor that actually moves that autofocus. So you got to kind of double check and make sure everything's working okay. There might be some combination too. There was a period of time where you could manually focus and autofocus on some cameras, and you got to watch out for those because maybe it's not super intuitive. There's not a big button or a big switch that says autofocus, manual focus, right? It might be buried or hidden somewhere in the settings. So figuring out how to focus the camera is going to be the final piece of the puzzle to make your first exposures when you first pick up a film camera. So to review, put your film in and set the ISO, figure out how to set the shutter speed and aperture, figure out how your light meter works, and figure out how to focus the camera. I think you're ready to go out and make your first pictures on your first roll of film now. I'm here. If you have questions, shoot me an email, get in touch. Let's touch base together and figure this out. Try to make sure that we're going to be successful. The scary thing about shooting film and the wonderful thing about shooting film is you don't have that instant feedback that we have with digital photography. We won't know until, at least a week after we make a picture whether or not it came out. And that's part of the magic of working in the darkroom. So I'm glad you're here along for the ride on that.